Greetings, everybody, and welcome to today's VentureBeat webinar on how to get your game noticed in a saturated market, brought to you by Xsolla. My name is Dave Clark. I'll be your host of this VB Live webinar today. Before we get started, just one quick note to let you know that this will be an interactive webinar today. If you have any questions for the speakers, we invite you to type them in at any time into the Q&A panel on your screen. Also, if your question is specific to one particular person, if you could help us out, please be sure to indicate that person's name in your question so that we'll know who to address it to. All right, well, let's get started with today's discussion on how to get your game noticed in a saturated market. And let's begin by meeting our speakers. First, we have John Radoff, CEO at Beamable. Chris Hewish is president at Xsolla. And Dean Takahashi is lead writer at GamesBeat. And Dean will also be moderating today's discussion. Let's start with John. John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Yeah, thanks. My name's John Radoff. My company is Beamable. Beamable is a live services platform for games. So if you imagine games are structured around the 3D engine and then the back end that makes it all possible, we're the back end component that gives you all that stuff. My background is not only running Beamable, but I've shipped games to about 20 million consumers. I even ran an ad network for games back in the day that reached millions and millions of people. So I've been on the demand gen side, the technology side, the game development side.
Terrific. Thanks, John. Chris, you're up next. What can you tell us about yourself?
Hi, my name's Chris Hewish. I work at a company called Xsolla, and we really help developers go direct to consumer, everything you would need to run your own games business. So think of us as your business engine, everything to do with e-commerce and connecting directly with players. And I've also been in the industry a very long time and have worked on all sides of the business. Worked in development, designing, producing games, and then got into publishing, and then ran a few studios, and now am working on the business side of it. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. And finally, Dean, tell us about yourself, and then you can take it from there and lead us into the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I've been the lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat for 14 years now, and I've covered games as a business on a daily basis for about 26 years. And I'm also the organizer of the GamesBeat Summit events. Our next event is GamesBeat Summit Next on October 25th and 26th in San Francisco. And I've had the pleasure of having both Chris and John speak at those events. And I've spoken with them many times, so glad to have them back. And our start us off with the question for Chris here. You know, there's been a lot of M&A activity related to mobile, and just this morning, Unity bought IronSource, a mobile monetization firm, for $4.4 billion. Seems like the market is quite in flux. I saw a comment from Eric Seufert, an analyst in the mobile industry, and he noted this merger is a direct result of Apple's app tracking transparency ATT privacy framework, which was rolled out in April of 2021. Was sort of described by most people as the sort of IDFA changes. And we've seen a lot of the mobile industry get affected. You know, Unity's stock price and IronSource's stock prices have fallen dramatically. And, you know, a lot of this he attributes to just the after effects of the IDFA changes. And so I guess I wonder what your observations are about like how this has triggered a lot of M&A activity and a lot of other changes in mobile. Chris?
Yeah, it certainly had a big impact on mobile, and a lot of companies, I believe, underestimated the impact it would have, primarily around their models of just acquiring certain high-value users, right, and bringing them into the ecosystem. And that's made it much more difficult for a lot of companies to stay profitable. Their models really weren't built on getting sort of more of a general user base. And then, you look at Unity, for example, the IronSource acquisition. Obviously, Unity, they have Unity Ads, which has been impacted by IDFA as well. So that is kind of not surprising that they would look to expand into a different area to try to grow more lines of business and more lines of value. But really, for us, the way that we look at all of this, it just reinforces the fact that if you want to be successful and break out in this crowded market, part of your strategy needs to be figuring out how you can get that direct relationship with your players. And, I think what we've seen is prior to IDFA, people were so reliant on just going through the platform holders, going through the store, and really at the mercy of the platforms and whatever guidelines they would put in place. And we've seen that when those guidelines change and your only avenue of connecting with users is through the platform, that you can really be put into a bad position. So that's why we're big advocates of, and we've talked, I know John and you and I have talked about this before, just big advocates of get that direct relationship with your players. It will allow you to really weather whatever storms come your way, right? Such as IDFA.
And John, your own reaction as well? Oh, you're on mute, John.
Yeah, have the relationship with your players, but also have that flywheel going within your game that constantly re-engages people and takes that community and brings it alive on a regular basis. I think there were a few things that you could really predict out of all the IDFA, ATT changes. One was more consolidation in the game publishing side of the business, because there's a lot of advantages now to just having a player identity that you own across a vast number of properties. There's also the prediction that it would get harder to be in the ad networking business, the tech side of it, which is, I think, part of what we're seeing with ironSource and Unity. So it's a little bit harder for them, but hopefully now a 1 + 1 = 3 situation between them with all the technology that they bring to bear to be helpful in this market. The other one, though, too, is just the eroding economics for mobile games generally. So a lot of this change means that it's harder to target customers through advertising to map the ideal customer profile to the kind of game that you're doing, unless you've got access to those big networks. So that means that your game has to be that much more profitable now to actually compete in these advertising markets, which is ultimately really it's an auction market, right? So you're bidding on ad inventory. So the ability to bid on that is directly proportionate to how much you can monetize, how predictable it is, how long the life cycle of your customer base is. So those things means that some number of games are also getting squeezed out of the market, at least in terms of their ability to scale up with new customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you guys both sort of talked about it from the developer point of view, because that's what this session's all about. It's how to get your game noticed in a saturated market. And there was another big event that affected things for developers as well last week. The European Union adopted some very strict regulations for gatekeeper platforms like Apple and Google last week, and I do wonder what you think that means for the market as well.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I've shipped some mobile games before. The first one that I shipped on mobile was a game based on Game of Thrones, so a big entertainment franchise that lots of people loved. We didn't do any advertising for that game. We launched on mobile, and featuring and the brand recognition around that game was enough to bring in quite a few users. The market has really changed since then. Right? I feel like I was quite happy to part with 30% of my income back then, given that Apple essentially helped me create the business by channeling huge number of customers to us, alongside of George R. R. Martin and HBO bringing the heat with Game of Thrones. It's hard for me to understand how they can still justify a 30% cut based on the declining value of what they provide. I get the argument around consumer safety, and they provide a tech platform that they have to keep investing in. All that's great. I just don't think that 30% really continues to make a lot of sense. So I think when they won that case with Epic, in some ways it was a Pyrrhic victory, because it simply told legislators and regulators that if they wanted to change things up, it would become their responsibility. So I don't really know what to make of this EU regulation. Frankly, I'm not an expert in what they're goals or how they're going to implement it. But I think that's symptomatic of the combination of the declining value of the App Store cut combined with, people like Epic not getting satisfied through the courts.
And Chris, there's a lot of sort of relevance to you guys with the sort of what this means for alternative stores, I guess, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there for us, and we're still going through forming our own sort of internal legal opinion around it. But already what it does is it really further validates and frees up or clears the way rather for something that we've been doing with a number of mobile companies over the past year, which is helping to build up mobile web shops. And that's basically where we're helping people put a web page or a web shop up online that they own themselves, and they're able to direct users to that and engage with users on the web or outside of the app, and then sell and market directly to the players to get them back into the app or to give them things in game. And they can do that without having to pay the 30% fee. But what's important to note is it's not just, hey, here's a way to skirt the fee, right? It's actually you're providing an entirely new level of service that players can't get within the app. So there's a lot of community engagement going on. There's a lot of events, a lot of activity. So, John's obviously knows live services inside and out, but it's a way to really engage with your players in a much more lively way than you can within the app. And we're seeing that is driving incredible returns far beyond just the gain you would get on a better margin. Having said all of that, what's happening with the European Union, we're really interested to see how this impacts the ability to offer additional payments in app itself. The opportunity there is either replacing Apple altogether, or more likely being able to go in and fill in the gaps that exist for already in the App Store with Apple's payment, solution, where about 40% of the gamers out there globally might be able to get the game on iOS, but they just can't actually pay for anything because they don't have. Apple has not integrated local payment methods, right? So right out of the gate, that's a potential big win of being able to bring all these alternative payments in that will allow you to convert existing players you already have that want to spend but are just unable to spend because their payment methods aren't offered by Apple. Right?
You just addressed our first question from William Volk, who did want to know about alternative payment methods and how to bypass App Store billing. I guess that's something you guys make easy for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been doing that with a number of big companies out there. So, we have a lot of Scopely, Nexters, NetEase, just a whole roster of companies that we're working with to come up with additional ways to monetize their mobile games, and alternative payments is a huge part of that. Like, I don't want to be like a salesy guy here, but it's been better than everybody's expectations. But keep into the theme of it's just another way to get a better relationship with a bigger part of your player base, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think part of it is just how do we put more dollars in the pockets of game developers who are creating all of this amazing content? The more dollars you can give back to them, the more options and innovation you bring to things like payment systems and community and all of this stuff that we're talking about. Then you're going to see a multiplication of the types of games, the quality of games, the number of options that consumers have. So the interesting preview of this was like you go back 10 plus years ago, some people may remember the advent of social gaming on like Facebook, right? Mm-hmm. In the beginning, it was the wild, wild west, and there was definitely bad parts of that too. Like I got sick of being spammed with like, give me a nail for my barn over and over again in my feed. I didn't like that. But what I did like was all the innovation that was going on inside games, not only from a gameplay perspective, but the social mechanics, the payment systems. And you can practically time the decline of that whole ecosystem to the point in time where they locked down the payment systems so that they started taking the 30% cut, and then no longer really providing a whole lot of value on it, which, that combined with the emergence of mobile in a big way kind of spelled doom for that whole market. So I think that innovation across the whole ecosystem is really important in giving game developers more choices, more options for how they can monetize the types of payment systems, and then taking a lower cut of it is important for just making sure that game developers can build profitable, sustainable businesses.
And John, you get to see a lot of sort of game developers in action here. I guess where do you think they need a lot of help? And if mobile game devs really want to stay independent, what should they be doing?
Well, I think that you need to be looking at the deep life cycle of your game and your player population. This is no longer a market that's about like churn and burn, throw some money at ads, make a tiny profit, move on to the next group of players. Like, I think the opportunity for game developers right now is to really build sustainable products that last years. So I think where game developers need the most help is how to structure the systems around that sustainability. Game developers have tons of creativity. They've got great ideas to bring into games, but then sort of feeding that cycle so that every day, every week, there's something new for that community to engage with. I think that's really important. It's kind of this combination of ongoing content, ongoing activities and events to do within your game that can kind of really drive that flywheel long term, just keep people super active in the game environment so that it becomes part of their life cycle. It's their lifestyle, really. It's a hobby. It's more than just pop into a game and play it. It's kind of becomes part of who they are, is that they play certain kinds of games.
By the way, I'd encourage the audience to ask more questions too. If you have any questions, we'll hit them. So keep them coming. They're very welcome. Chris, your own take on some of that, how to stay independent for game developers? Where do they need a lot of help?
Yeah, staying independent. I really think that it really comes down to knowing your audience and developing a strong bond and relationship with your core player base, and really treating them like humans, right? Like, listen to them. Don't treat them as something to be feared. Don't shy away from requests or questions or complaints. Obviously, you don't want your players to turn around and drive everything you're developing. But I think one of the beauties of being independent is that you have the freedom to get out there, talk with your audience. You're kind of a little unchained from some of the corporate defensiveness that comes up around defending a corporate brand, right? Which keeps a lot of developers from really getting out there and connecting with the audience in the way that they may like with their players. So, that's going to be incredibly important. Just getting out there, talking with your players, developing a bond with them, having that direct relationship, and really then inviting them in the tent, giving them, the ability to evangelize and advocate for your game. And, that's a real power that I think independent developers can tap into, that a lot of larger sort of big AAA or corporate organizations just are allergic to, right? They just really shy away from that. So I think that's a big part.
It segues into sort of a slightly different sort of question for us too. It's like, how do you take advantage of being an indie as opposed to a AAA company? There's advantages indies have, right?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you take advantage of being indie. Again, to me, it comes down to the community piece of it, of being able to be nimble, being able to get out there. I think there's a lot more freedom to experiment, a lot more ability to test things out, and but do it in a way where you don't break what you have, right? But I think where the bigger companies can afford to do all of that in-house and spend cycles testing things out internally, as an indie developer, you don't have those resources financially necessarily, but you do have the resources if you develop the goodwill and the community to help you.
Community is one of those words that kind of has been abused too much in the game industry, because in some companies, community basically means like a customer service function,
Right?
Or like the forum moderation process you use somewhere to respond to people as they show up online. There's elements that are deeper than that. It really ties into like, what is the culture you're trying to create for your players? How do you bring about that culture through the gameplay systems, through what you talk about, through the brand that you're creating. Like community it's a really big thing, and that's an opportunity for smaller developers, is to really make your decisions about what you want that culture to be, how you're going to reinforce it through gameplay systems, how you're going to reinforce it through the way you interact with that community and explain what your vision is for the gameplay experience. And that's something that can be harder to do at a large publisher where it becomes much more homogeneous across a lot of different products. So I really encourage game developers to invest in community, very early in the process of creating their game, and actually engage your community, get feedback on the product, like actually make them part of the game creation process, but make very deliberate decisions as you're going about it. Again, don't think of it as just like you hire someone to do forum moderation for you. Like I feel like community and culture is something that starts with the head of a studio, and it goes through everything, right? So you got to make really deliberate decisions about what's going to be important to you and how you see the multi-year journey you're going to be on with your players. So I take like a game like Star Trek Timelines, which I shipped over 6 years ago. So I don't run the game anymore. It's now operated by Tilting Point, but it continues to go really strong because of that investment in the community and the culture of the game and the systems we created in the game, like regular recurring storyline events and things like that just became part of the expectation of how you'd experience it.
I think, John, you touched on something really important right off the top when you talked about how community is a word that's been overused. It has a lot of different definitions, right? So I think, just listening to you, one of the recommendations that I would give people is, this is like communications 101, right? Make sure you have a clear definition of that word, and then you're sharing that definition with everybody, right? So when you are going to engage with, quote unquote, your community, before you even do that, maybe take a beat and ask yourself, understand what kind of engagement do you want? What kind of relationship? What are the boundaries? What is it you're going to ask? What do you want? What are you going to give? And if you can have all of that, you don't want to make that up on the fly, because that's where we've seen a lot of people get in trouble and communities can turn, right? Because there was not a clear expectation or definition up front. So that would be one, cautionary piece, just to, define that like you would any other feature or mechanic in your game. Define what community is going to mean and communicate that to your players so you're all on the same page.
I think maybe here's a chance to sort of offer some, I guess, more nuance or updating to the information here. We're talking about like what's different in 2022, especially on things like, say, what you've been talking about, community or otherwise, getting noticed.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's different now than a few years ago, just the ongoing the increase in the number of channels, right? Back when, like you talked about Facebook in the early days, okay, there was really one channel, right, to engage with your community on. Now there's just so many different channels, and those channels are even regional, right? The channel you may engage with the community through in the West is going to be different than in the East, and even within regions there's differences. So taking a moment to understand who your players are and then where they are, so that you're targeting the right channels, right? This idea of being on all channels, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Discord, whatever, that's just not realistic for a lot of indie developers, right? It's very resource and time intense. So find out where your audience is, engage with them there, and don't just assume that they're all on, Facebook or some. You don't want to be talking to the wrong, the wrong place, right?
Understanding your audience is absolutely key, and you were kind of touching on that, especially in today's market where it's going to be less about like this highly calculated hyper targeting of a user that's picked up off of an ad network and brought into your game because of very similar properties. Like, you are often not going to have that capability. So really understanding your audience is the foundational piece of building a community. So understanding what drives that audience, what they really care about, actually getting to know them, not as numbers and statistics in a marketing funnel, but like what do they actually care about? I think that's going to actually be much more important now in a market where it's going to be about great games and gameplay and building audiences and long-term relationships with your customers. That audience insight understanding is going to be more important than ever. And one of the things because you asked about like what's new in 2022, I wouldn't say this is entirely new, but the trajectory we're on is that these audiences we're talking about, they're essentially owning more and more and more of the holistic play experience. So used to be that games were completely self-contained. Now, many popular games are highly moddable. You've got esports in some games. You've got the whole live streaming ecosystem of personalities and people talking about games. But then even at a micro level, like if you think about things like events and new content, there's this continuum that's forming between being in a game, experiencing some aspect of novelty into that game, recording it in a video, sharing it, maybe even just with your guild or your local group of friends in that Discord server. So actually supplying your community with content through the gameplay experience that they can take out into the world to share with their friends, show people what they're doing. So I think that whole community content experience, flywheel, to use that word again, is a big part of what's going to continue to drive games on top of that fundamental audience understanding that people need to have.
Yeah, we've definitely seen this huge surge in modding. Even if you just look at Roblox and user-generated content there and that growth. And I also thought it was very interesting the way that a lot of the Web3, the blockchain game companies, used Discord communities at the beginning. I believe that like Yield Guild games, they raised money on the strength of how large their Discord community was. And, they could just point to that and say, even though we're blocked from, the app stores or blockchain games and cryptocurrency payments were really blocked from getting on iOS or Android, they drew attention to their games through the Discord communities. And I don't know if that's still the answer, John, but it definitely seemed like the right path for them to go when they were blocked in one way, I guess.
Yeah, I think business models always emerge in response to not being able to do what you want as a creator in some respect. If you look at the whole origin of free-to-play, well, free-to-play existed at scale in the Far East before it existed in the West, because in a lot of those markets, there was a combination of piracy in some cases, or just people didn't really play in the same systems. They would go into, these like internet cafe type settings and play games there. So it was just a different experience. They initially were paying for time, then they were paying for the things you bought in the game as opposed to buying the game itself. So free to play kind of emerged as a reaction to that. So some of the things you're seeing in Web3 are in response to the fact that, different channels just don't permit it in some way. That said, Web3 has so many issues right now. Like, it's still a user experience nightmare, and it's hard to distinguish between like what of the things you were just referring to, how much of that is speculators trying to come in and out of the market and beating the hype drum and doing all that versus sort of authentic gameplay customer who's there because they just want to have a really fun time. But in its best version of itself, you would hope that becomes, the bigger scaled out solution of things like, Kickstarter and crowdsourcing kind of experiences where people really wanted to get involved in a community early on, put some money behind something that they really loved and enjoyed, and then become part of the community earlier on. So I think that drive is present in people. We see that in crowdsourcing. We see that in Web3. So we know that's something people want to do. Like, they want to tie themselves financially to something that they really love. The big question mark is, how much of it is about love? How much of it is about greed and speculation? I would say certainly so far it's been more the latter than the former, but I think as things get easier and it becomes more mass market and we have good games to experience, that should evolve.
And then we have a question from the audience here from Jay Moskowitz. are casual games marketed in a different manner than huge action games from major studios? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I mean, yeah. I mean, the short answer is yes.
But I mean, even that sort of, you're kind of characterizing a bit of a dichotomy there, which is not quite accurate to begin with, because if we look within casual, like, first of all, what are we talking about? Are we talking about casual PC games, indie games I can download from Steam, a casual game on mobile, a hyper casual game, a mid-core game? Like, casual, just that one definition alone can mean so many things. So the thing I think to come back to is audience again. So rather than think of just the genre, the bucket of a game, like a AAA game versus some version of casual game, it comes back again to understanding your audience, where they live, how you can communicate with them, what they care about, and having those deep insights, because that audience understanding is going to tell you how you market to that customer base more than just the category alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing that those designations, the genre designations, or the psychographic of like casual versus core, that those were just handy ways to bucket people. But to John's point, if you take the time to really understand who the audience is, you then cater what works to them. It's really less so about some big genre definition. And I think when you look at the genre definitions, you're kind of looking at the top of the funnel when it comes to acquisition and how you're going to get them in there. But what we're really seeing be successful, and this ties back to this whole community theme, is focusing on engagement, right? And because once they're in the funnel and they're engaged, that player, whether it's a quote unquote casual player in a casual puzzle game, or a core player in a MOBA or something, they're going to stick around because they're engaged. And that type of engagement is, you're doing events, you're giving them frequent, new content, you're just sharing things with them that are meaningful to them. So a lot of those tools become very similar. It's just the content that goes into them, which is different, and which is based upon knowing who that player is. And I know there's been a lot of talk because of IDFA changes around mobile advertising, and do you start to go back towards big brands to cast a wide net and bring people in, and what kind of games does that impact? And that all certainly matters and will factor into that top of the funnel piece. But really, I think it doesn't mean much if you haven't figured out, okay, once they're in, we really understand what they want, who they are, and how they're going to stay engaged, and how we're giving that to them. And that's really the important piece, because if you have that, you can just scale up right over time. You're going to be in a positive place.
I think emotion and storytelling is what's become so critical now, though, because understanding that audience and how to just engage with them on the level of emotion, and then knowing what they care about. Is this an audience that's going to care about self-expression within your game? Is it an audience that cares about competition? So do you give them a stage for that? Is it an audience that really cares about teaming up with each other and going on experiences through a process of togetherness? Those are just 3 examples, but then how to wrap that in the story and how you communicate the experience out to the audience. This stuff, frankly, is harder stuff. It's harder from a gameplay perspective. It's harder from a marketing perspective, but also it's a much bigger opportunity, because this is going to be about having an audience that lasts years and years and years, maybe even decades for certain games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to joke that the brands are chasing after the metaverse right now, so that's where you got to go find them. But I do think maybe if we look at this through the lens of 2022, what can developers improve live operations post launch? What do you see really working right now, I guess? John, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, for the developers we see being most successful, they have a regular cadence of providing new content and updates to the game. So it doesn't need to be these things that come out once or twice a year and it's a huge feature update, although those are certainly appreciated by customers, I would think. But it's more about, how do you create the stuff that happens every week, or even every day, or every few days in your game, and figuring out how to have the authoring pipeline that brings content in new items, new characters, new storylines, new quests that you can do, and then creating some kind of context around it for competition, whether it's a visceral kind of PvP kind of competition or a more lighthearted, hey, we're just moving up the leaderboard as we go and enjoy the tasks that you can perform in the game. I think mapping those two things together is something that we're seeing in games running on our platform right now, like The Office, for example. The Office is based on super popular global hit TV show. People come into the game, they love it because they're reminded of all the characters and the stories of The Office that they love. But what keeps them coming back is the recurring regular events, that there's always something to do that you get to experience. And it's packaged in story, and that makes it just super fun for people. And that becomes part of what they expect. It's almost like waiting for the next episode of a sitcom or a TV show that you like. You're waiting for that next experience that you can have in the game. And for games that have deep social aspects, that adds yet another layer on top of it too, because now you've got the community talking to each other and communicating and just enjoying things together through this playfulness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Chris, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing I would add here is a lot of what we've been talking about may lead, listeners or viewers to think that we're, oh my God, if I'm not doing some big, free-to-play live ops game, I'm in trouble. And I just want to put out there that these principles really apply to all games. And one of the examples that I always reference is Fail Better Games and what they did with Sunless Seas, Sunless Skies, Fallen London. And they, those aren't like, live service free-to-play games. They're premium titles, but they've created, again, as John mentioned, that story, that narrative. They've created a real culture, a vibe, and then they engage with their players. I get emails from them, just announcing updates or things they're working on, and they'll introduce new storylines or things like that into the game in more of kind of a more of an add-on or expansion pack kind of way, like from going way back. But the point is, you can still employ a lot of these principles regardless of the type of game, right? So again, it's just knowing your audience, knowing your value proposition, understanding where they are, and developing a relationship with them.
Yeah, it doesn't even need to be a free-to-play game with like an in-game economy. That can be very helpful, a huge percentage of the time, especially on mobile. But you could have a game with regular content updates where it's about engaging your community and having that relationship with the customer. And the business reason for you to do that is because your community is going to be the best leverage you have for gaining new customers and having those people go out into the world and talk about how much they love this game. Like one of the examples that I really enjoy is Undertale. Like Undertale has no free-to-play economy. It's made by one guy. It has this incredible community around it because people are constantly mashing up and reusing pieces of content, creating their own little bullet hell battles, creating YouTube videos. Like they've kind of given the content to the community and the communities run with it. And now Undertale is like part of our culture. Like I don't know if you have kids the age of my kids to a couple 10-year-olds, like Undertale is just like something they identify with now as being like Undertale players. And this is a game that didn't depend on any kind of big free-to-play economy. They just made a really deep game with a lot of emotional impact, great storytelling, good characters, and then they let the community run with it.
Yeah, it reminds me of something Dimitri Williams at USC used to talk about a lot, and that was the social whales of games. And these weren't the people who spent a ton of money. They weren't whales in that sense, but they were kind of like the person at the bar who was the life of the party. Right. And then everybody sort of came into that bar and spent money themselves because they wanted to be part of this big party, I guess. And the social whales, are something that I think the game developers, need to find. Right. They're the people who might be leading a clan in a clan-based game or something like that. But they're the sort of the magnets that keep people coming back, I guess.
And now you've got what you've called the social whales, but on top of that, you have the creator economy. That's the newer aspect of this. So it's not only about being that guild leader who might play an MMORPG and rally your team together to do raids every Sunday night kind of thing. That still happens in MMORPGs for sure. But now it's like, how creative can you be in some of these roles? Can you make YouTube videos? Can you live stream on Twitch? Could you mod something? Can you add something to a game? Like that in itself is a huge opportunity for developers. And I think going back to one of the things Chris was saying much earlier, like you as an indie developer, you can set all the rules for that. If you want to give everything about your game back to the community and let them run with it, like you can do that. That's harder for a big publisher to make those decisions. And by the time they think of how to do it, they've mired it in so many different policies and procedures and structures that it can even have the result of just squelching what you were hoping for. So you, as an indie developer, have a lot of interesting possibilities within that space where you can help your community do whatever it is they want to do if it aligns with your own business goals.
I do wonder if maybe we can tackle a couple of questions related to capital. Like when you have capital, what do you do with it? And maybe we can start it. Do you think anything different is happening right now with respect to games venture capital? It feels like with all of the different winters going on now, like the crypto winter and the inflation winter and the interest rate winter and the geopolitical winter, that some of these investors might be getting quite scared right now. I guess even if they have raised a lot of money more recently, I think they might not be investing it as aggressively now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer is the cost of capital has gone up. So there's different types of investors for sure. There's a lot of money still out there in different game directed funds, right, on the VC side. But that the cost to get that has gone up. And what does that mean? Well, if you're looking for an equity investment into your studio, the amount of equity you're going to have to give up to get the same amount of money you might have gotten 6 months ago has probably gone up, right, to mitigate the risk from all of these winters. And then I think the appetite for business models that are going to maybe take longer to turn a profit has gone down, and that's certainly part of what we've seen impacting valuations for companies like Unity out there that really aren't particularly profitable, and they're based on spending to acquire. So if you have a business model that is predicated on spending to acquire users, and you're going to do that at a loss or a low margin for a long period of time, that has gotten a lot harder to pitch in this climate, right? And conversely, if you're sitting on something that is profitable, even though the size of it may be smaller, people have much more of an interest in that kind of model now. So if you have an existing business and it may be smaller in scale, but you're profitable with good margins, you're going to find that is the direction that capital is starting to head, and that's where some of the equity investments, the equity bankers and companies are coming into the market now more so than they were maybe over the past few years, because that's their bread and butter. They find companies that are profitable and can benefit from an infusion of cash to scale, whereas VCs are going to invest in high risk early stage, and that's gotten certainly harder right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, the good news is there is a lot of capital out there, and for game developers, there's more options for capital than ever before. There's VC funds. There's there's the crypto sources of funding. There's game publishers. So there are a lot of choices out there. But I think the thing people just need to realize is, number one, the funds that have capital, they're triaging within their existing portfolios first. So they're looking at it and they're like, okay, this company looks like a lost cause. Let them go away. This company looks like they're doing great, so let's make sure that they do even better. And maybe there's some sort of middle cases where not quite sure yet, have a chance to become great. In some cases they'll give those guys some more runway. So that's the first thing a lot of funds are looking at now. And then for new capital into brand new companies or or capital into companies that they may not have an existing investment in. What I'm just seeing is that money's coming slower. So funds that were thinking they were going to deploy capital in a couple of years, they're going to deploy capital over 3 years now. So they're going to be cautious. They're going to figure out, what do valuations really look like in this new environment? What are the headwinds? How does the ability to scale things up really look a little bit longer term? So they're just being more hesitant and being much more careful with the deployment of capital, which for you as a game developer means it's going to take longer to raise. The terms probably aren't as good. You might have to wait a little bit longer. You might have to prove a lot more. I think the biggest thing that I tell game studios is focus less on the big idea of the game and more about understanding the audience and really what delights them, and then collaborate with these audiences, these communities of players, and figure out how you're going to make the best game for that audience. And doing that means having the longest runway that you can have. So make sure you've got time to figure this out.
I would like to remind the audience that, you can ask your questions. We're happy to answer them, or just keep asking questions until we get more audience questions in. But I think then there's that question of what you do with the capital. And in the past with free-to-play games, it was you raise a lot of money so you can do user acquisition, and you can acquire lots of users. Maybe 2% of them might pay. You get your way to profitability. You find your whales that way, right? And now it does seem like, Apple has made that a lot harder with the sort of the emphasis on privacy over targeted advertising with IDFA. And so maybe there's a new game plan for that capital if you want to get noticed in a saturated market, I guess.
I mean, honestly, I think, Dean, it really circles back, and not to be a broken record, but take that capital and focus it on how am I going to get that community, right? In the sense of how we've kind of been talking about it, right? Of, how am I going to go out there and understand who my players are, what my value proposition is, where they live, and how am I going to engage with them? And so using that capital to maybe there's a new role on your team that you wouldn't have maybe, thought of before, where you have somebody that can help you on the community side. And, the value there is if you can do this and you can engage with maybe it's a smaller audience initially than you were thinking on the bigger sort of, huge acquisition spend front. But if you can engage with enough of an audience to get metrics to show that you have a profitable business model, right? Even if it's smaller, you can then take that and go and access, capital, which is now looking at, okay, I want to invest in a proven model. And, so I think that's just shifting a little bit the types of maybe roles that you would be looking for on your team. What is the stages here of, okay, it's not going to be just a big acquisition funnel. It's going to be more, let me develop as the flywheel, as John's word, all credit. How are you going to establish that so you can take it out and use that to generate additional investments if you need them, right?
I'd rather see a game developer take more time to get the game right and really get an understanding of how that player relates to the game over a longer duration of time, right? We're no longer really in a market of like D30 retention numbers, tells you everything you need to know about a game. Used to be that was like, it's still an important metric. I would just say it's not as important now as like, what does that player look like a year plus, right? So it's really hard to know what a player is going to look like a year plus if you haven't taken some amount of time to be working with that community. You may not have had a year of working with them, but you're going to start to have some real sense of what that community values and what kind of things are going to keep them engaged over a much longer period of time if you spend time with the community. I think the main thing I just want to emphasize is like community isn't just talking to people that are your potential customers. Community is understanding what drives them and figuring out how to communicate with them and incorporate the systems into the experience that reinforce that loop. Like there's the gameplay loop when you're in the game. There's this bigger loop around the game, the community, how people talk about it outside of your game, how they share what they say about the game. like take Wordle, for example. Like Wordle is just a minimal example of that in practice. Like there's the gameplay loop. We all know what it is because virtually everybody tried Wordle at least a couple of times. And then there's the loop, which was, and now grab that little graphic, throw it into your Facebook feed. Unlike the share a nail thing that I talked about from early, Facebook games earlier, this is just completely authentic. It doesn't require it to push things in via an API and force people to look at it. People are just sort of packaging it up on their own because they think it's fun, it's cool, it's simple, it's not pushy, right? And it may be that was just pure magic that it turned out the way it did in that particular case. But I think it's a really good example of just understanding the core value of like what people would think is fun about that game. And then what is the way that you can empower your community to talk about it.
Awesome. We got another question. Is web shop billing a possible path for accepting crypto for in-game purchases for apps on Google and Apple?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, look, there's already solutions rolling out, right? That sort of allow you to, if you don't have a wallet, right, or you're using a credit card, to be able to do some sort of crypto engagement, and whether in or out. So certainly, right, getting off of the platform, the web is so much more open and free to e-commerce. So definitely.
Cool. I want to see if we can get through this question quickly, but if we circle back to what you can do for developers with your platforms, can you highlight, like what you think of as most valuable right now in 2022 as we're in some kind of recession, right? John, maybe you can start us.
Yeah. It used to be that it would require a massive technology undertaking to build things like just updating the content in your game and then building events around it. So we have people that sit down with our platform, Beamable, and you can add an event with a leaderboard and a content update process. Like people do that like in 10 or 15 minutes into implementing our game. And that's because we took a very designer-centric approach. It starts with working inside the 3D engine that you use every day and just sort of drag and drop those capabilities in, versus starting from the standpoint of building up a whole server infrastructure and eventually you have a bunch of internal APIs that people can wire together and get those systems. So we've really just set out to make live services something that any game developer can use. So if you're a small indie, yes, definitely we have expanded the market so anybody can do it, but it's really for anybody of any size. For a large company, a large studio has the same kind of impediments, and they shouldn't be spending millions of dollars building this stuff. They should just go live with things that are easy so that they can iterate faster. We talked about Runway. Well, what do you do with Runway? You iterate a lot in your Runway rather than just use it building stuff that nobody is going to really need ultimately. So the way you find out what you need is put stuff in front of customers and they tell you whether they like it or not. So we hope to just make people a lot more agile and make live services in reach of any studio at the earliest stages of their game development.
Sorry, I didn't know if you want me to jump in here too, Dean, I guess.
Oh, yeah, I muted myself, but yeah, what do you do for developers?
So, as I said up top, we really provide a whole basket of solutions that allow developers to go direct to their players and basically build your own store, right? Your own platform, if you will. And right, so you can, if you're mobile, we've helped a lot of companies spin up these mobile web shops, which are great. PC, same type of thing. You may think like, oh, I have a game and it's launched on Steam and I have to stay there. Well, actually, you obviously stay there, but you can also build up your own presence and sell and engage directly with your players. And it's not just about payments and selling stuff. It's deeper than that. It's being able to own the data from those players. It's being able to have your own sign-on system, a whole bunch of other things, your own digital distribution capabilities, just outside of the platform. So there's a lot, but to wrap it up, it's really about going direct to players. And then within the platforms themselves, it's about being able to or not within, but in parallel to that, it's about being able to expand your reach, right? So even if you don't want to deal with all the community and going direct to players and all of that stuff, you should at least know that if you're going through a platform, whether it's on PC or mobile, even console, that a big chunk of your audience just isn't able to pay on those platforms. So working with somebody like us, we really help people engage with the entire audience around the world. And it doesn't have to be either or, us or the platform. You can kind of work integrated together, so you can really get full coverage. So direct to players and full coverage is really the two big things.
I think we're maybe down to our last question on a 1 minute answer here, but we have a question from Sasha about any advice for teams that have built a community but need now to improve engagement. Anybody want to tackle that one?
I mean, your community will tell you that, right? If you have, I mean, you need good designers for your game, is what it comes down to. So you need designers who are able to listen to community feedback, and you're going to get a whole lot of feedback. You're going to get different segmentations of your customer base, really understanding and having some conviction around the kind of audience that you want to engage with, and making sure that you focus on the needs of that particular audience that you have conviction on. Is design and good solid product management, and having the agility in your development process to actually react and incorporate that information. Otherwise, you're just talking to your community but not doing anything with it.
Yeah, and in my experience, one of the cautions I would give anybody who's yes, ask your community. They're going to tell you. But two things for the people on your team, on the development team, that may sort of not want to be designed by community or whatever, just remind them or remind yourselves, this is just a data point, right? It's a data point to help inform what you're doing. And most likely you already have an idea of things that you should be doing, but it's good to get external data points that come in, whether it's pure data from looking at how, metrics, right? Or more qualitative by listening to the audience, but it doesn't need to take over. There's a lot of people fear losing control, and that's not what we're talking about here, right? It's just, this is another very, very valuable source of qualitative data that you can use to inform what you're doing. Every now and then you're going to get something completely out of left field that you're like, oh my God, that's a great idea. Why didn't we think of it? But most of the time it's going to be helping you get through your backlog of like, okay, we've got 100 things we want to do. What should we focus on? And then the other part of it, which I've seen happen, is don't overreact to your community. I've seen this before with developers that are kind of new with engaging with the community. They'll see one post or 2 or 3 posts on the same topic and flip out like, oh my God, the game is on fire. We have to change this. So, whoa, wait a minute. That's like 2 people out of 1,000 or 100,000. Let's slow it down. You don't need to react too quickly. You don't need to, be the pendulum swinging back and forth all the time. But just understand that as comments come up, take them in the grander context of just, okay, how big of an issue is this really, right? So don't overreact, don't under listen, and yeah.
Yeah, I would say, definitely don't let your community design the game for you. That's a recipe for disaster.
We have to wrap it up now. And Sylvain has a question. Try Xsolla.com is my answer there. But I'd like to thank John and Chris for a great conversation again, and turn it over to Dave Clark for our ending here.
Thank you so much, Dean, for moderating today's discussion, and also a big thanks to our panelists for all of their insights, John Radoff and Chris Hewish. Thank you also to Xsolla for making today's event possible. Just a few final notes before we wrap things up here. Today's webinar was recorded, of course, and you'll be receiving an email with a link to access that recording when it's available. So if you missed anything or if you'd like to view it again, you'll be able to do that. Also, in just a moment, a very brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please let us know what you thought about today's webinar. You can rate it on a 5-star scale. You can also provide us with comments and other feedback. So be on the lookout for that survey when it pops up in just a moment. Finally, a reminder that today's webinar is copyright 2022 by VentureBeat. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted by VentureBeat, which is responsible for their content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Thanks so much for being with us today. That does conclude today's VB Live event. Have a great day.